Hello and welcome to the Srijan Wednesday webinars. If you're joining us for the first time, this is a community initiative by Srijan Technologies where you can tune into some great sessions on topics ranging from front-end technologies, UI UX, mobile apps to media, entrepreneurship, community building and digital marketing. Today we have with us Baruch Sachs, Senior Director UX at PegaSystems. Baruch is going to dive into the intricacies of enterprise UX design. We will get a good look at the opportunities that exist and the unique challenges that accompany enterprise UX today, with specific focus on how to solve these challenges in project implementation. Before we get started with the session, I would request all participants to please type in any questions that you have during the presentation, and we'll take them up in the last 15 minutes of this session. Also, please don't forget to take the conversation live on Twitter using our hashtag StrijanWW. You can share your thoughts by tagging us in your tweets using our handle @Srijan and the speaker's handle that's up on your screens right now. So without taking up any more time, let's get started. Baruch, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today around a topic that is pretty near and dear to my heart, around opportunities and challenges within enterprise user experience design. So, Pega, this is the company that I work for. Some of you may have heard of it. We are a leader in BPM and CRM software. Our customers include the largest 1,000 companies in the world. And the projects that we work on, and my team in the user experience realm specifically work on, are all enterprise. And essentially they transform business processes and operations. They're very complex projects. Some of our customers process over 100 million pieces of work per day using the Pega software. And so we have a unique perspective into some of the challenges and opportunities that exist when trying to build a great user experience within the enterprise. A little bit about me. Started at Pega 9 years ago with a single goal: build a UX team. We didn't have one at all when it came time to help our customers with implementations. And so in the past 9 years, we've built a UX team. We are currently at 40 UX consultants globally. These consist of two different types of roles. UX architects, they focus on the strategic architecture and the design of the application. And then we also have a number of front-end developers, what we call UI solution developers, that actually help build the solution. All of them are 100% billable to client projects with up to 50 to 75% travel. The engagements can be very short, such as 2 weeks, all the way up to a longer-term engagement, which could be 2+ years. So we see the wide range. We drop in and out of projects. Sometimes we're embedded in projects and see it from the whole entire life cycle. So that has given us quite a good perspective on enterprise user experience. So I think that everybody knows that user experience is really, really important. And certainly in the consumer world, we've seen that drive quite a bit of innovation and quite a bit of technological advances in UI design and UI implementation. The enterprise world definitely has some opportunities and challenges. And when you consult with these enterprises, it really comes down to this line on the screen that I have, which says, it doesn't matter if you're right. It matters that you are helpful. And that is very true within enterprise user experience. It's probably the best lesson I can give as far as being a consultant and working with organizations and also working in the field of user experience. A lot of times you might be right. But when it comes to user experience, there's such personality involved, there's such subjectivity involved, that it is sometimes hard to, even though you are right, to convince somebody that you are right. But you need to go on a journey with them and bring them forward. And that's really a key message that would go throughout this webinar, that always consider yourselves to be a helpful person in the field of enterprise UX and not necessarily trying to tell people that you are the right, your approach is the right one. This is essentially what we do all the time in enterprise user experience. We are that gray in the middle. We help people come together. And oftentimes, the people that are represented in blue here, one side represents IT, and on the other side represents the business. Right? And UX in enterprise world is oftentimes in the middle. And we have to bring those people together to the same table to actually be face-to-face to talk to one another. Because there is a lot of mistrust in the enterprise world between the IT organizations and the business groups. The business groups have the vision. The business groups have the need to do something with whether it's transforming a process, whether it's building an application, whether it's starting a new mobile initiative, whether it's targeting a different group of people. And this is true whether the enterprise has an internal application that only serves the employees of that enterprise, or it is something that needs to be out there, such as a new account opening for a bank or a claim process for an insurance company. The business group has the vision. However, the IT organization is generally responsible in some fashion or the other for implementing that vision. And I have to say, having worked in the enterprise space in the past 15 years, there is a huge level of mistrust between these groups. The IT organizations might, maybe through some fault of their own, through not any fault of their own, fail to deliver as to what the business wanted. And perhaps the business has failed to communicate the proper vision to the IT organizations. But in general, there's a lot of blame. There's a lot of shifting priorities that happen in between. As is often the case with enterprise application development, the business might own the vision, but the IT owns the budget, right? And so if the business says, I want something within 10 days, and the IT group says there's no way we can do that, it has to be delivered in 90, right away you can see that you have a disconnect between these two groups. And so UX is something that can bind these two groups together, right? You could be able to talk to the business and distill down their requirements into a true vision that IT can execute upon. And that's really what is needed. The business needs to be able to give IT a vision that they can execute upon within the budget, with the time frame that they actually need to do it. So let's delve a little bit deeper into what enterprise UX really means. Let's start with some of the challenges, because I think it's important that we are very upfront with some of the challenges that exist within enterprise user experience. In a lot of enterprises today, especially large enterprises, there's an engineering centricity to the organization. And what that means is there is this prevalent understanding that technology drives solutions. Now that's great. However, from a business perspective, it's not engineering centric, it's user centric. It's actually what is it that the system can do for the user, not what can we allow the system to have to be manipulated by the user for. Right? And that's a key point. So in the enterprise world, there's this engineering centricity, and they've ruled for a long time, and now the user experience is becoming such a critical point of whether you have user adoption or a successful rollout, or honestly, UX makes money for organizations, and organizations are starting to realize that, and they're pressuring engineering to step up and deliver upon that. However, if you have an engineering-centric organization, they are by very nature not focused on user experience, and that is a shift, a paradigm shift within that organization that is slowly but surely happening. Enterprise user, in the enterprise, we would say politics exist everywhere, right? Whether it's consumer or enterprise, but in the enterprise world, it is so obvious, the politics that happen. There could be 20 different business groups all vying for a piece of the pie. There is politics within the engineering organization. There are people that have survived within the enterprise for 10, 15, 20 plus years, being very political animals, but not actually ever delivering on anything. The consumer world, you can't really have that, right? You have a set amount of time to get to market, to deliver a product, and to have people use it. In the enterprise world, you can actually never have to deliver anything, right? You can basically deliver a substandard application. You could deliver an application that doesn't meet all the requirements but is still out there and is running and supporting the business. So the bar is a lot lower, and it's all about how you manipulate everything. And like I said, there are people that make careers out of sidestepping blame and not being responsible for delivery and still moving up within the enterprise. So knowing how to navigate those political waters is very, very important, but it is also a challenge to be able to deliver upon a really good enterprise user experience. I touched on this in the previous slide, but it is very true. There is a mistrust between the business and IT within the enterprise, unlike I have seen in any other area. In the consumer world, I don't necessarily see it as strongly. In the enterprise world, every customer I interact with, if I've interacted with like I said, the Fortune 1000, almost every single organization that I've touched has this mistrust between the business and IT groups. And to be very frank, enterprise UX, or enterprise, I should say, the enterprise doesn't always attract the best talent. Certainly, both in the IT groups and the business groups, they're all going to that consumer, right? They're all going to places, everybody wants to work at Facebook and Google and so on and so forth, and any new hot startup, and they want to build apps and everything. And the enterprise world is sort of the last frontier, and it was seen very much as a boring place until people started to realize that large, complex enterprises actually touch our lives, the daily lives of us, more than anything. We all have credit cards. We all have bank accounts. We all have insurance policies. We all have phones that have, service providers. I mean, these large enterprises basically touch our lives more than the latest app do. And so as people start to realize that, people are coming more and more into the enterprise. And the challenges of working in a user experience fashion in the enterprise is that you have a captive audience. What that means is there's no impetus to change, right? People are working in the enterprise. They're employees of that. They are not outside people that have a whole host of options in which to choose to buy something from or contract a service. They actually work for the organization. So a lot of customers that I deal with, a lot of enterprises kind of say, well, what they are going to get in terms of the UX is much better than what they had. It might not be the best, but it is better. And therefore, we don't have to worry too much about it. Along with those challenges come an amazing amount of opportunities, though. And these opportunities are the fact that the bar is really low. So the results that you are given are seen much more immediately. You are not working all the time at such a high level. You are actually being able to impress your business users, impress your internal users with very, very small changes. It could be as simple as all of a sudden allowing them to see a couple pieces of data on one screen versus in the enterprise application that preceded what you're working on. You had to go to a couple of screens to see this information, or you had to go even to another app to see that information. But with this new application, you have integrated and brought that information into one screen. It's amazing how people really get excited about that because it does save time on task. It saves part of their day. Budget for user experience is usually bigger in the enterprise. On a whole, you will usually have more dollars to play with, more time to do user research, more time to do testing, more time to do design than you would in non-enterprise or smaller enterprises. And honestly, it's a chance to lead a full culture change. I mean, those very challenges that I talked about represent true opportunities to change. And enterprises are starting to see, over the past few years now, starting to see the real value in bringing user experience into the life cycle of the project. So being able to lead that full culture change can be very exciting for a more entrepreneurial UX person. You're forging a path. You sometimes might be the sole UX person on a project or in a group, and you could have a team that is just getting involved. Maybe that team in the enterprise has been focused on the front-end stuff, the public-facing components of an enterprise, such as the website or a self-service application, and now they're turning their attention towards the internal applications. So you are able to forge that path. And the captive audience, while it's a challenge, it's also an opportunity. You never have to worry, or you don't have to worry a lot less about finding people to sit down with you and take a look at your UI, having people do usability testing with you. You have a captive audience. They have an inherent investment in the success of this application, and they want you to succeed. You just have to be able to target them the right way. So when we look at what design should really measure from a pure user experience perspective, we usually come up with three things: usability, delight, we want it to make the user actually really happy to use something, and conformance. Conformance is an interesting one because we want to be able to measure across pages, across fields, having people do everything in the same fashion so that we could drive operational efficiencies into it. That is something that design really does need to measure and doesn't often measure. Too often we focus on the first two, not as much on the third one, but that's really, really critical because if you said you got a big budget and you're able to redesign an application, and at the end of it, you're able to say, well, we improved usability and we improved delight. Users are really happy. Those are all well and good. But how did you drive operational efficiency? What metrics can I look at? What reports can I look at to see how time on task has been reduced, or average call handle time is reduced, or first call resolution is increasing? Something to be able to give me a sense. Well, you can't do any of that without some sort of conforming behavior within an application. But what about meeting business goals? This is a critical one for the success of any application. At the end of the day, you have to deliver a product. You have to actually deliver something. It can't be that you have these audacious goals and you spend a lot of cycles and 2 years later you look and you're still developing. That's just not, it doesn't work in the consumer world, and it really can no longer work in the enterprise world. User adoption is something that design definitely needs to measure. You need to understand how many users are really focused on using it. Especially, it's interesting when I look at companies that stand up a new application, turn off the old application. And it's very interesting to take a look at and see how many users have adopted the new application versus how many users have continued to use that old application. If you have too many users using that old application, you realize that you failed somewhere along the line. So there are a number of principles of successful user experience in the enterprise. They're listed here, right? You need to bring clarity. You need to make something that was otherwise complex clear within the application. You need to keep the user in control. You need to simplify the things they're doing. Respecting context and being consistent are very important. Providing an obvious primary action. You want to be able to guide the user throughout the application. You want to be able to delight the user as well. Let's take a look at one example here of what content versus context means. And I can give you a sense here about how maybe a person not focused on user experience would build a screen versus someone focused, right? If I look at these two screens, they're actually the exact same screen. One of them considers only the content. One of them probably, and I know why this was built that way, the one on the left, under content, excuse me, where it says, I got a requirement that a user has to be able to pick one option from a list. So if I took candidate to a developer, they would say, okay, let's list that question out, give the options, radio buttons, and go ahead. Nothing wrong with that screen. However, if you don't understand the context about the user, if you don't realize that this might be self-service, you're going to want to give them more. You're going to help them make that option. So everything on the screen on the right actually takes into account all of those principles of successful user experience that were in the preceding slide, right? You're guiding the user, you're giving them clarity, you're simplifying it. Even though there's more elements on the screen, you're allowing them to make a choice much easier. Because if I just looked at all the options on the left under content, I have to think about it a little bit, right? It's not all that exciting. But if I have the ability to align my choice visually with people that look like me or people that represent me, in the case of a family, that's me, it makes sense, right? I don't actually have to read as much. I don't have to actually think as much. I could also look at the goals that would be associated with my selection and make an informed choice. So that's really important, right? Picture on the left, a faithful execution of the requirement. Picture on the right is actually a true user experience. And that's where we get into the concept of strategic user experience versus tactical. A strategic user experience really focuses on 4 things: the overall navigation structure, information design, the layout structure, and the data architecture. Too often we focus on the tactical, which are all of these. We focus on the visual, we focus on alignment, whether something looks good. We focus on the colors, we focus on labels. Those things are very important to an overall user experience, but they are not of a strategic nature, which is so desperately needed within the enterprise world. Let me show you a typical enterprise screen. Right? If you can't really see it, it doesn't really matter. You could instantly see the shape of this UI is terrible. You can instantly see there's way too much data. I can't navigate through this. This is a very typical screen that comes out of enterprise user stories or requirements, etc. Whereas tons of business groups come together and they say we need all of this data, right? We need all of this data to be on a screen. And you kind of take a look and you say, well, how can anyone actually use this? How does this deliver user experience? And this screen gets at the heart of some of the challenges of enterprise user experience, where you have these captive users, so you don't need to care about it. You have a bunch of business groups that don't really care that they have too much. They feel they need all this data to make a decision. But we know this would never fly in a consumer world. There's no way a screen like this could ever work. So if I took a look if drilled down further into that screen, and I just took a grid view, right? And you might be able to see in the picture there's a horizontal scroll bar, which means there's a ton more columns that didn't even show in the screenshot to be able to go over. But we know people can't really look at all this data to make a decision. And this really boils down to some of the enterprise challenges, right? You have multiple lines of business. So you could have 20 plus sometimes. They don't really talk to each other. They all claim to have unique data needs, and they need all the data all the time to be able to make a decision. And when they have influence on the UI design, this is the type of screen that you get, right? Because it's one application that's going to be looked at by all of these users, and you know that because it's going to be servicing all of these users, and they're not able to simplify and bring clarity, such are the successful principles of user experience, that they actually will not be able to use this screen all that well. And that's a shame. The other thing we find in the user experience world in the enterprise is the lack of prototyping and showing things. So this is a picture. Most of you would recognize the face. It's the Statue of Liberty. But what this picture is before it was actually built, the designer of the Statue of Liberty ran out of money. And they brought it to the World's Fair in Paris to try to get investors to see what it would look like and have those investors visualize what this could be if they just had the money to complete it. This is a great picture about things that we should be doing. Imagine if the designer of the Statue of Liberty did not want to show anything until it was completed. And that is something that happens in the enterprise world all the time. Whenever I say, hey, guys, we need to take a look at, some of these ideas are really good. We should show them to users. We should show them to the business. No, Baruch, we can't show them to the business yet until we have it completed, because we don't want them to look at it and think that that's how it's going to be. We can't trust them to be able to visualize what it could be. We're going to get more requirements than we thought we would out of these sessions. But really, in an attempt to curtail this, all they're doing is hurting themselves in the long run. They guarantee that what they deliver will not be accepted by the business because the business has no say. The business does not like anything less than having stuff be foisted upon them, right? And given no choice to be able to come back and have some influence. So this is a great example of how it's important to wireframe. It's important to prototype. It's important to show things in no matter what state it's in, if it's unfinished or finished, so that a person can actually really have a look and have some influence. So the example that I gave you before of that long screen, there's a lot of standard UI solutions that could happen, right, to be able to address it. User personalization, per user, per access group, come up with different views of that same screen. Having some conditional UI, maybe having some advanced interaction techniques per user, per group, etc., to be able to allow them to identify it. The problem with that is there is less chance in the enterprise world for all those solutions to be acceptable. And the reason being is the user community is so separated out, right? And it's so geographically separate that a lot of times you would need to have very consistent structure, very consistent ways of doing things, so that if, say, somebody is in New York City calling someone in Hong Kong and they're talking over the phone about an application, you don't want to have those two people doing different things in different ways. You need to have them doing the same things in the same way. And that's why a lot of times when we propose solutions such as that, the enterprise says, nope, not acceptable. You can't have it be different between these user groups in the enterprise. It makes sense, but it also is some a constraint that we have to work within. So I take a look at some of our own screens that when I work inside of my own company, and I look a few versions back from where we are today, I see a lot of the same issues that I'm talking about actually happening within ourselves, which, you have different business groups contributing to the design. You have different data needs. You have different customers coming to us say, well, it'd be really great if you guys had this and this and that. And so this is actually a version of our software like, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago, maybe even 5. And if I look at it today, I kind of cringe, right, because it doesn't look that great. It violates a lot of the same things that I've just been talking about. And so we had to strip it down, right? We had to start adopt the same medicine that we are trying to administer to our clients internally and get some of that same user experience focus back inside, right? And it really comes down to intent-driven UI design. In the enterprise, this is no more important, no more critical. I mean, it is so important to be able to look at what is it that the user is actually trying to do and not be data-driven, but really be intent-driven. And all that means is you could very easily build a UI such as this with tons of data, give it to a user, hope they figure it out, right? Because if you gave them all the data that they asked for, then they should be able to figure out and you laid it out in the proper way. But never finding that sweet spot, never identifying where the actual intent is. What is it that they are trying to do? What are the critical tasks that they are trying to do? Makes it very, very difficult for a user to be able to focus. And so when we look at intent-driven UI design, we have to think about how do we get there, right? This is actually the redesign of that same UI, right? After we spent a lot of time focusing on user experience. And we realize right from the get-go that, yes, we changed things. We changed a lot of things that would fall into that tactical bucket, about alignment and colors and data design, etc. But we also focused on the strategic pieces of the user experience. We focused on the information architecture. We focused on the navigation. We focused on how things were being done from a task perspective. If we didn't do that, we would have just been putting lipstick on the application. And that's what a lot of enterprise user experience projects come to be. They don't attack the hard stuff because it is hard and it takes some time. And it's not planned for, it's not built into the project plan. And because it's not built into the project plan, people simply just view it as an extra, right? And they say, well, we have no time, we just have to go forward. That's a shame, right? I mean, user experience needs to be considered at the very beginning of any project in order to have any hope of being successful. And so this is a good example of how we could take an existing data-driven design and make it very intent-driven. It follows a lot of those principles that I talked about. It follows all those principles of successful user experience, of simplifying things, bringing clarity, having obvious primary action, respecting context and being consistent. Any good UI needs to be able to answer yes to 3 different questions. It has to be able to say, do I know where I am? Do I know what I have to do to get to the next page? And when I get to that next page, do I know what that's going to be? If I can't answer yes to those 3 questions, I have failed in my UI design at some level. So we look at what is a foundation for successful user experience in the enterprise, and it boils down to these buckets, right? You're going to get functional specs no matter where you are. You're going to get some level of requirements. You're going to have information architecture that needs to be around that. You're going to have interaction design that needs to be around that. You're going to have user interface, graphical design, and then you have usability testing. So if you notice, the usability testing falls underneath everything, which means you're constantly doing it. You're iterating on the usability testing over and over and over again. You're not just doing it at the end, right? You're doing it at the beginning, you're doing it at the middle, you're doing it near the end, and then you do a follow-on so that it builds upon each other. Because everybody knows what happens is if you don't focus on design until UAT or to the QA cycles, you're going to have a huge cycle, and you're way too late, right? You're just way too late to ever consider UX at those cycles. Some of this and some of the key techniques actually are to be blamed on the way that we do requirements now. And that falls to the classic user stories. User stories don't really drive anything when it comes to user experience. User stories fail spectacularly because they just make too many assumptions. So let's take a look at some of this, right? If I say, and this is pretty pretty common. As a particular user, right, a persona, I want to do something, which is my action, so that I have this expected outcome. Right? I think that's pretty clear. That's a classic user story. But it also has a lot of limitations because really that beginning part as a particular type of user, it's pretty irrelevant, right? Because you really are only focusing on action and expected outcomes. But when you say, I want to do something, the question always remains, how do I know that that's the best action to take? And then when you look at the third part, well, first of all, you're making too many assumptions right at the beginning. You're basically saying, like, as a particular type of user, so you're assuming that. You want that particular type of user wants to do something, so you're assuming that. You just don't know, right? You don't know how that's going to play. But if I looked at something in context of a job story, and this is not my idea. This is out there. If you just Google job story, you will come up with pretty much exactly what I'm showing you here. When you look at job stories, you realize that this particular one is actually much more beneficial. You start looking at the fact when a particular situation is happening, I want to actually do something which has motivation, right? So you want to actually look at the situation that you're in, have motivation, right? You actually have motivation. So then you could actually do something, right? That's your expected outcome. So instead of going from who the person is to and the action that they want to this is my situation and this is my motivation for doing something, I actually have this outcome. That's a true outcome. That's the outcome that really matters. And so this type of stuff is really, really critical for how you would actually go about getting a good user experience within your application. I think it's important to remember the fact that the user experience and UI is a great leveler. And what I mean by that is the fact that everybody has an opinion. Everybody is interested now in the UI and the overall user experience. And so I often joke with customers, I say, if I was a technical architect, if I was a DBA, if I was some person who really came in and discussed at length diagrams and the technical architecture diagrams, etc., people would generally look. There'd be people that were on the same level as me or someone in the same functional area as me. They would have questions. But if I brought the business in, I brought users, I started telling them how we're going to architect this whole thing, they generally would be quiet. But as a UX person, I go in. Everybody has an opinion. So I did a quick study, right? I looked at all the technical architecture meetings I was invited to over the course of a project, and I looked at the entire list of people that were on that list for the invitees. Excuse me. About 25% of the actual invitees actually showed up to those meetings. If I had a performance meeting, it's pretty much about the same, 25%. When I got into functional requirement meetings that I needed to attend to, it increased a little bit. You had 50 to 75% of the invited attendees actually showing up to those meetings. But every time you called a UI or a user experience meeting, I had 100% attendance. And this was a course of a year-long project. So I did this study over the past year. That's an incredible number when you think about it. And honestly, sometimes I've called user experience meetings or just UI meetings. People will come to it thinking I have a UI to review, but really what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the business and the IT groups to sit face-to-face and actually discuss a piece of information that I have questions on. And so they show up, I have them, they're my captive audience, I don't let them out of the room until they get the answers. Those are some great techniques to get people to talk. And what you realize is, if you didn't have those meetings, you would hear a lot of, well, we talk all the time. This group and that group, they know exactly what I do, or this is how a user community does it. And I have to say, 9 times out of 10, I bring these people into a room and I go through this, and somebody says, well, we do it this way, and the other person says, no, we don't, we do it this way. And they said, I didn't know that you did it that way. And you start to have conversation. You start to have some better, more shared understanding of some of the challenges that user experience architecture faces in the enterprise world. And that's really important. So I would have to say, people always show up to UI meetings, but more importantly, they always have an opinion, right? Some of the challenges that we have, though, is to make sure that the opinions that people have don't affect the design, right? Because an opinion is just that. Unless somebody could back it up, unless someone could point to a business goal that that opinion maps back to, unless they could point to a true need for something that would go back to, you have to understand that it's just their guttural opinion, right? And they need to make sure that they always tie it back. So a lot of times, I'm working with a client now where the designer designed screens in a large enterprise. The product owner signed off on it. Then that designer showed it to the IT senior management, the people responsible for implementing this. The product owner's on the business side. He likes it. He said, that's good. They showed it to IT, and IT said, I don't like it. And so the designer came back to me and said, Baruch, they don't like it. I have to change everything. And I would say, why? Why do you have to change everything? Well, that person didn't like it. I said, okay, did they give you a reason why they didn't like it? No, they just wanted it to look more like their front-end web page. That's not a requirement. There is no goal that says all screens must look like our front web page. There's no business requirement that says it must look like that. The product owner, the business person who actually is the one who has to use it, or his team has to use it and actually knows what the goals are, signed off on it. But yet, this person's opinion is now driving someone to change design after there's been sign-off. This happens all the time within the enterprise. This is a huge problem, actually, not just in enterprise architecture, but also in any kind of, consumer-driven application. And so, people always try to derail design simply by saying, I don't like it. It doesn't look good. It needs to be sexy. It needs to be fun, more fun-looking. It needs to be more engaging. It's very easy to say those things. You have to push the people to be able to not just have an opinion, but have an informed opinion that can map back to a business goal. So once you have people, once you have all these people in the room, like I said, call UX meeting, you're going to get everybody. What do you do? And these are some of the guiding factors that I give to you, is that you need to figure out a common data set. You need to figure out the common structure that's going to be there. It's there. It might be hard to find, and you might be tempted to listen to the fact that everybody has unique data needs. But in the case of that grid that I showed you with the horizontal scroll bar that had about 50 columns, I guarantee that you could find a set of 10 items that exist amongst all those disparate business groups within the enterprise. All the other pieces of data that are needed can be a one-click away option. You could expand the row. You could click on and have a modal pop up. You could have a ton of different things, different interaction techniques that allow someone to see a more advanced data set. So figuring out that common data set requires some effort, but it's always there. Similarly, you have to figure out the critical task path. You have to figure out what is the data that's going to complete the tasks 80% of the time. And 80% of the time is a pretty good number. If I could complete my task 80% of the time with the data that I see on screen right at this moment, I'm in pretty good shape. If I have to do a one-click away to maybe see a couple more pieces of data to sometimes have to do a task, that's fine. And you have to figure out what that critical task path is that's going to hit the majority of users, because that's the sweet spot you need to aim for. So using those one-step away options for the remainder is important. Shortening labels, making data entry inputs consistent, chunking things up. These are things that you need to agree upon with your business, right? Because that will influence your design. People need to sign on to that we know that we need to limit the amount of data on our screens, or we need to be able to ensure that we have a positive user experience. So we need to figure this hard stuff out now at the beginning of the project so that we don't let the design run away. The other issue that we face in the enterprise world is that a lot of transformational enterprise software projects look to staff reduction as one of the main drivers of their ROI, right? They might have 40 people doing something. They feel that if they do a redesign, they can reduce that staff. That's never the right driver, right? That is never the right driver at all, because another challenge within the enterprise is, like I said at the earlier part of this webinar, you have people there 10, 15, 20 years. You have people there that are planning on retiring with this company. And so when you have that level of interest and that level of investment within an enterprise application, you know that staff reduction is not going to drive anything. Staff reduction is actually going to scare people, and they're not going to be invested in the application success. They're not going to want to give you the right information that you need to design a good user experience. So you need to take a look at what is the real driver of the ROI in this application. The other issue is, in the enterprise world, the simple is not so simple to achieve. Oftentimes the front end is looked at as a band-aid to the back end, right? Performance, the ability to massage data, the interaction behavior. So when we look at it at the enterprise, it's usually not just a single enterprise. It is a homogenization of a ton of different acquisitions over the years. If I took the example of JP Morgan Chase as a bank, it's not really JP Morgan Chase, it's about 20 banks over the course of the past 20 years that are now a single entity. And they have all different backends, and they have all different levels of performance. They have different databases where we're getting data from, and the ability to massage that data might not be there. They have different interaction behaviors on these backends, and so you have some level of difficulty to build a good front end that is going to mask everything. Right? So when you're faced with that issue on an enterprise project, it's where a lot of projects sort of give up, right? They adopt the best we can mentality, right? And the reason being is the fact that the only enterprises that are really successful at achieving that consumer grade user experience are the ones who are willing to invest the organization in the data, right? Internal UX teams need to change too, right? Because a lot of times they are not understanding of that, right? They don't have a good sense. They just design within a vacuum, and they don't understand the challenges that IT has in actually making that reality. They don't understand the challenges that the business has to be able to create that vision. They just want to design. A lot of times, working for an external software vendor, we go into a customer that has their own internal user experience team. And we generally work well with them eventually, but sometimes we don't work well with them at the beginning because they just kind of say, well, we want to design, and we want to design what the standard is for the organization. And so when they want to do that, by nature, they are discounting the real challenges that the IT and business groups have with the organization. And, that's where UX gets a bad rap sometimes, as being out of touch with what's really necessary. So why? Why do people give up? It always comes down to this. And this is what UX needs to understand, is every project has a budget. Every project has a timeline. You need to be able to properly live within those. You need to be able to understand that those are the drivers. Those are the drivers whether you are on the business side. Those are the drivers whether you're on the IT side. If you cannot create a good user experience that fits within these two, you're not going to be successful. And so while as a designer, as a UX person, as a UI developer, whatever I am, however I'm concerned with user experience, I need to make sure that these guide me at all times. Right? And I'm doing the best I can within the constraints of what these things are. So let me just quickly go through a case study to kind of bring all this into play. So large enterprise customer has their own UX team, right? They have a separate systems integrator. They have another outside firm contracted to provide design, and they have an outside vendor that provides the technology. Right? So, okay, 4 different companies essentially all working together to create this application. At some point, somebody within the business, comes back and has issue. We take a look at the situation. Right? Both the system integrator and the design team are on fixed price bids. Find out that the system integrator is not really well educated on the latest version of technology that they're using, and really has no UI developers or designers assigned to the project. The design team has basically pure designers. So again, these people that are out of touch with what the project really is trying to do. They're not familiar with the underlying technology. In this case, the IT funds the project, not the business. So the outside view of the internal design team is that they're really focused on conformance and not context. It's their design, their way. Again, they're out of touch. They're outside of both the business and IT, so how are they really effective? And they're often set up as a cost center to various organizations. Therefore, by nature, they are at a disadvantage already. So the customer comes back and says, hey, look, we're finding after working with these 4 companies that our UX and our construction teams, our development teams essentially, are not producing the results we need at the speed required to be successful. So, okay, let's take a look at as to why, right? So you take a look in the discovery process. You start taking a look at the user experience folks and the development team, right? And you find that from a UX perspective, a lot of conflicting priorities. They have limited transparency, so they work in a bubble. They aren't really aligned to the dates. Again, that time thing that I talked about, they're not really understanding the time, right? And those next 3 bullets cover that. They're approaching UI on a screen basis, not a goal basis. And they have no plans for usability testing whatsoever, which is surprising but true. If I take a look at the development team, you kind of see very little UI is being built in the chosen technology. They're doing lots of custom CSS. They're trying to cope with business architect and UX misalignments. Their requirements are constantly moving from the business. Right? They have limited collaboration with user experience. They're trying to cope with the cost of implementing the design. So again, this is from the other side, but it affects what I talked about, where UX doesn't have an appreciation for the budget, right? Or what their design is actually meaning in terms of cost and time. So right away, you can see some common themes, right? There's no really prioritization of UX. There's lack of transparency, lack of collaboration, technical knowledge gap. I hope what I'm telling you, what I'm showing you here, it resonates with a lot of you, because this happens on enterprise projects literally all the time. So what do? We kind of talk to different people. At first we focus just on the UX folks and the development folks, but now we've got to talk to different people. We've got to talk to the business folks, business system analysts, solution owners, figure out from their perspective what's going on. Excuse me. Find out, from the business perspective, there's limited technical expertise. That's to be expected. There's little focus on iterative design. It's more like, hey, let's design it once and go ahead. They're really not doing agile, even though they say they're doing agile. And I think all of us kind of understand that everyone does agile in a different way, from company to company. None of them probably do it properly. Right? None of them probably do it as fully as anyone well-versed in agile methodology would like them to be doing. They find that their guidance blocks the use case delivery, and in general, they're not able to write these use cases properly. So we start coming up with recommendations. Implement and enforce a UX backlog. Right away, you are creating a transparent concept to help solve prioritization issues. Develop and use a proper UI pattern library that can go across the enterprise application. So your time to delivery is reduced. You could reuse assets. There's a huge reduction in documentation. And you support that move into actually prototyping within the technology you're using versus outside tools. And then recommendation 3, you're creating a plan for design validation and usability testing. Right? So you're validating everything that we talked about previously, the UX needs and the business goals. You're raising any deficiencies before investment in the construction, and you're overall maximizing that chance of user adoption, which is probably the most critical. And then having some true UX people embedded in the project so that they understand the time and money constraints is super important. Right, so you have a line of coordination. You're able to have somebody that is responsible for the overall UX use cases, technical validation, prioritization, and you just have that continuity between the groups within this application development. And a lot of times at the end, you find that everyone agrees on a project team in the enterprise where you want to go. It's just a matter of knowing how to get there. It's a matter of somebody being able to say how to do that, right? A lot of times that requires somebody to adopt the role of a UX solution owner, right? And they're responsible for everything that I have listed here on the slide, right? I mean, they're the ones that are responsible for this, and a lot of times this is absent from an enterprise project. This could be a UX designer, this could be a UX-oriented business analyst, this could be a lot of different people, but it's always necessary on a large-scale enterprise project to be able to bring everything into some sort of focus. So I leave you with this. Austin Gavell is a great designer. I suggest definitely looking him up, reading about him. A lot of times, user experience in the enterprise is boiled down to deliverables, and when those deliverables are not being delivered or being delivered in a minimal fashion, people believe that they are, the problem. And he says something very interesting here. He says deliverables are not the problem. because UX practitioners are not really in the deliverables business. That's not what we do. Right? We're in the business of finding and evaluating problems and solutions. We're not in the business of coming up with a solution that is in search of a problem. We're in the business of really evaluating problems for their validity and coming up with solutions to really address the heart of them. And a lot of times on enterprise projects, we spend a little too much time on this concept of, well, what's your deliverable? Right? And if you don't deliver something, it's not seen as valuable. And that's really just not the case at all. The value of UX on a large-scale enterprise project is finding a solution, evaluating it, making sure it's true, and finding that, finding the solution to be able to implement on an enterprise project. And so that concludes my webinar on challenges and opportunities with enterprise UX. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of common issues that affect projects across every different type of enterprise. But if we focus on what we're doing to drive a solution versus just a deliverable or just, making sure that we're finding a solution in search of a problem, we'll never get there. Right? So with that, thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer some.
All right. Thank you, Baruch, for that very interesting session. And we have a lot of questions coming in, and I would just like to again ask all of our attendees that if you have any questions, now would be the time to type them in. So taking up the first question that we have is, how do you handle a project scenario if you get in as a UI UX designer midway through the project?
Well, that's a great question. It happens all the time. We never, well, I shouldn't say we never. We hardly get in at the time we want to, right? A lot of times, a technology is picked in an enterprise before UX is involved, or projects start and then they decide to bring in a UX person. And sometimes it's our own problem because the UX team is booked well in advance, and if a project kicks off, we might not be able to provide someone until midstream. So if you are involved midstream, it obviously depends what that really means because it varies from organization to organization. But I would quickly learn what the business goals are of this application, what some of the main issues are that this application is trying to attack, and always have those ground every activity you're doing. So if design is already done, if wireframes are built, if the application's built, whatever it is, evaluate that. Align it to the business goals. Talk to people. Talk to the business owners. Do not stick within your own organization. Do not stick within your own group, because it is never too early to get usability testing cycles involved. And I would think that if you come in the middle of a project, you probably have a lot of artifacts built. Do some testing. Do some validation. Even if people say it's already been done, do it again. In the enterprise world, you have this great captive audience, like I said. And from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock p.m., lunchtime, you're able to go into a cafeteria in a lot of enterprises and go grab some people, have them look at some things, say, hey, does this make sense to you? Aligning it to those business goals. So there's a lot of quick and dirty kind of things you can do, but I would say no matter what stage of the project you get involved in, looking at the business goals, aligning that what you're doing to that at all costs, all your activities, is important, much more important than any specific activity you might try to do.
All right. Before we move on to the next question, can I just ask you to come back to the presentation, at least on the first or the last slide?
Sure.
Yes, that would be great. All right. So the second question we have here is, could an agile process help the UX work within an enterprise?
Yeah, and I touched a little bit on it. I didn't want to go with a specific methodology. Certainly a lean UX approach, right? And there's a lot of misunderstanding about how user experience falls into an agile methodology. There are books out there, particularly a book called Lean UX, which if you look it up would be very helpful to understand how the things that UX people do fit within agile. And the two can be done, right? We do them all the time. It usually requires having a UX backlog. It usually requires having what we call a UX runway, so where we stay a couple of sprints ahead of the team so that we have the ability to do testing, we have the ability to design things, we have the ability to get sign-off, we have the ability to hand things directly to developers when they go into the sprint that's going to attack those things. They have a design to work towards versus trying to do that in that same sprint. And so I think that, yes, Agile can help, or I should say UX can help Agile if it's done in the right fashion. If people are trying to do traditional Agile methodology with traditional UX method, might fall into the common issue of having some misalignment. It requires an understanding that UX has a place in Agile and it's important, and that in order to be effective, we need to stay a little bit ahead of where every sprint team is at that moment. But I definitely recommend reading Lean UX because I think it will be very helpful for people to understand that.
All right. Next up is that what advice would you have for someone who is just starting in the UI UX game?
Read a lot. There are a ton, it doesn't have to be books. There are tons of, fast company design, Mashable, they have, go look at the blogs, understand the challenges that people are facing, real world project challenges. If you are just starting out, take courses. There are boot camps, 2-day, 3-day courses that are available online or at a university where you can really get a good grounding. There's no shortage of resources out there, and I would say that there's also no shortage of mentors. There's no shortage of people that have been in this field and have done it for a while that are more than happy to give advice to people just starting out. The thing is that the marketplace for UX is so hot right now that finding people with a lot of experience is actually very difficult, right? So we as a profession have a obligation to be able to help out those that are just starting out in this profession, and it is one that most good UX people will relish the opportunity to do. So, like I said, read up on folks, read people's blogs. There's a lot of really good design material out there on the web these days.
Right. So next up, this is sort of a overarching question for the entire session probably. Where do you see the future of enterprise UX heading? Like any trends that you maybe see right now or anything that you will have?
Sure. The enterprise world in general is being driven by the consumer world, but they also have the luxury of time a little bit, more than we'd like to admit. They are slow to adopt. It's like trying to move a giant cruise ship and make an about face turn. Doesn't happen. Same is true with enterprises. So they're slow to adopt. They're slow to change. They are recognizing that they need to be a lot more nimble, a lot more agile to maintain relevance in today's economy. So I think with user experience, you are going to see a much bigger role of user experience within the enterprise, right? It is no longer going to be an afterthought or an also-ran. It is going to be first and foremost the critical success criteria. Therefore, you're going to see a lot more folks, a lot more enterprises building their own teams or acquiring them. And we've seen that already, with Capital One and various enterprises out there buying design firms, even large consulting organizations like Accenture buying these boutique design firms to instantly get some depth in this area. That'll continue for a couple of years. You're going to see enterprise really making a wholehearted adoption of mobile to the point where it's not just having a mobile app that can do one or two things, but really thoughtfully understanding how to provide the complexity of an enterprise application in a smaller device with offline capability, et cetera. That's going to require a lot of good UX design. So I think those two areas, both growing the UX capability within the enterprise and also understanding how true enterprise can really work on mobile, because these applications, it's not just buying a sweater or something like that on a mobile app. It's really some complex enterprise stuff that address a lot of complex data and in some cases private data of users. How you do that, how you manage that in the mobile space is going to be critical.
All right. So I think you're very close to ending the session, and if any of our attendees still have any questions, now would be the time to type them in. We have one last question with us right now, is that when you're talking about the user story versus the job story, you said that the story going like as a persona if I want to do this. So if you're completely not using the user story and going by the job story, so does that make knowing the user persona obsolete, or is that a step that's still important?
It's, I'm not going to, I personally don't find personas all that beneficial. And there's a lot of discussion on this out there in the web sphere around, in the web space, are they beneficial or not? Personally, I don't find them beneficial, but that has more to do with the fact that I don't think they're written all that well. It makes very little use for a developer to know that we have a particular person who's female and has 2 children, and she doesn't want to, she's impatient and she doesn't want to spend a lot of time. That could represent everybody in the world. And that doesn't really help us build a system. But if I understand the motivation of a person, right, even if that motivation is, I need to be able to do these tasks really quickly because I don't want to get fired, or I would like to get a bonus based on the time I'm spending doing this task, that's my motivation, right? That's much more important for me to understand than whether or not you have 2 kids and you like to golf on the weekends. That doesn't help me, right, as a designer or a developer to really get empathy or really understand. But if I understood the motivation is the reason why I need to do this really quickly is because I am compensated on the amount of spend on this screen, like a lot of call center employees are. That is a much better understanding and empathetic point for me designing or developing the system to be able to take into account. And so I think the job stories do a much better job at developing and designing applications than personas do, quite frankly.
All right. It looks like you might have ruffled quite a few feathers in the UX world with discounting personas, but your view does hold some merit, as in like I see the point that you're trying to get across here. So that was a really engaging session, and I do not see any more questions coming in at the moment. And if we do have any more questions, our attendees can send them into webinars@srijan.net, and we will take them up with the speakers so that you get your answers. But for now, we have come to an end of our session, and I would like to thank Baruch for that really interesting session. Taking us through the challenges and opportunities, and also the case study, which I'm hoping was really helpful for all of our attendees. So thank you, Baruch, for being with us today. And I would also like to thank all the attendees for being such great audience. And with that, I would like to close the session for today. And as for our next webinar, you will be getting a mail with all the details and the registration details. So thank you, all of you, and that's it for today.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.